Hello everyone, I'm Madhu Srinivasan from the Department of Biology. I'm going to tell you about invasive species and their impacts. Let's define some terminology concerning invasive species before we discuss other aspects of biological invasion. A native species is a species naturally occurring in their historical range. During the colonial era, many commercially valuable tree species were moved around continents. Range expansion is when native species colonize new areas that become favorable due to disturbance, climate change, or other factors that alter the environment. Expansion of native red cedar from forests to grassland ecosystems in the United States is a great example of range expansion. An exotic species is a species introduced from outside their original range, often from other continents. Invasive species are exotic species that are aggressive colonizers and have a negative impact on the ecosystem they have invaded. I will also be telling you about the impacts of invasive species and what makes certain species invasive later on. Exotic species aren't necessarily invasive. For example, many ornamental plants can escape from yards and breed on their own in the surrounding environment. This process is known as naturalization. Naturalized exotic species have the potential to become invasive if they spread over a large area and cause detrimental effects on the native species. What characteristics help a species become invasive? Invasive species typically grow faster and are better at competing for resources. They are generally aggressive colonizers capable of producing lots of seeds or offspring. The ability to produce a very large number of offspring is known as propagule pressure. Some other species may become successful invaders because they have defenses, like toxic skin of the invasive cane toad in Australia or the lionfish's venomous spines. Almost all potential invasive species benefit from enemy release, which is the lack of native predators to control the population in their new home. Invasive plants invade vacant niches left open by the removal of other native plants. Invasive species often colonize disturbed environments or edge habitats, like dandelions occupying bare patches on a lawn, or shrubs like honeysuckle colonizing logged areas in the Kentucky forest ecosystem. Invasive species can wreak havoc on their adopted ecosystems. Kudzu, sometimes referred to as the wine that ate the South, is a well-known example. It was introduced from Asia, and the US government encouraged people to plant the vine to help prevent soil erosion. In sunny, disturbed areas like alongside roads, kudzu can grow into a blanket of green that covers anything in its path. Kudzu smothers and strangles even large trees. Bush honeysuckle, with its pretty white flowers and bright red berries, is a popular ornamental plant that outcompetes native plants in forest ecosystems. Invasive animals can also be quite problematic. The Burmese python, introduced into Florida wetlands when people release their unwanted pets, can grow big enough to eat an alligator. Asian carp have taken over rivers, including those in Kentucky. Because of their voracious appetite, carp have outcompeted and decimated the populations of several species of native fish. Lionfish have enormous spines and eat other large fish and fish eggs. They were introduced into the Atlantic Ocean and the Caribbean by people dumping their fish from aquariums when they grew too large, uh, but these fish have no natural predators in these waters and hence have become invasive. Native species perform certain essential functions in native ecosystems. These functions range from conserving soil to purifying water, serving as food resources to other native species, to providing the very air we breathe. The roles that native species play are critical to the survival of native ecosystems and the human race. When native species have been driven to extinction by exotic species, their function is lost from the ecosystem forever. In many instances, it would cost millions, if not billions of dollars to replace the function that native species were performing via technological innovations. These are the very functions native species have been providing us free of charge. So what are the major impacts of invasive species? Invasive species displace native species through direct competition for resources. For example, invasive house sparrows aggressively defend nesting sites against native birds. Habitat destruction. Beavers were purposefully introduced into some parts of South America from Canada, um, and beaver numbers increased in these areas, and the beavers gnawed down large tracts of forest not adapted to beaver activity. Human and wildlife health. Invasive zebra mussels can build up large levels of toxins in their tissue which bioaccumulate, creating toxic effects in humans and other animals up the food chain. Disproportionate resource use. Zebra mussels again can also eat all the phytoplankton from the water, leaving no food for other native fauna and increasing the likelihood of detrimental algal blooms. Disruption of ecosystem function. Invasive species can affect nutrient cycling, fire regimes, and hydrology. For example, the golden apple snail had such a massive impact on wetland plant communities in Southeast Asia that it affected water turbidity, nutrient levels, primary productivity levels, and water quality. There are also economic impacts from revenue loss and money spent to mitigate the effects of invasive species. The aquatic plant Eurasian watermilfoil has caused an estimated annual recreation revenue loss of 30 to 45 million dollars in western Nevada and northeastern California. The impacts of invasive species can be far-reaching. We have been trying to address the impacts of invasive species over the last few decades. The costs are already enormous, both ecologically as well as economically. Unfortunately, the problems posed by invasives are predicted to intensify as it interacts with other global change agents like climate change and warming.